I spent 41 years reading rooms for a living. Auction rooms, specifically. The long Georgian gallery at Hartbourne Sale Rooms, where I started as a porter's assistant at 22 and retired as senior auctioneer at 63. You learn, in that profession, to watch a crowd the way a pilot watches an instrument panel. You read the temperature of a room before the first lot has even been announced. You see who is performing and who is genuinely moved, who holds their paddle with conviction, and who is bluffing for a spouse standing 3 bidders behind. After 4 decades of it, I believed I had seen everything a room of people could do. I was wrong about that. I was wrong on the 14th of November, in the main gallery of Hartbourne Sale Rooms, at the preview evening for the Renwick consignment, and I have not stopped thinking about it since. The evening was a private affair, invitation only, perhaps 45 guests. Hartbourne had been commissioned to handle the late Gerald Renwick's estate, furniture, silver, correspondence, and one remarkable instrument, a Bosendorfer Imperial Grand, built in the late 1890s, that had languished under a dust sheet in Renwick's drawing room for 30 years before we discovered it. The piano had been sent away to Glenside Restorations for 8 months. It came back in October looking like a photograph of itself from a century earlier, the lacquer deep and unblemished, the keys reweighted, the action rebuilt from the hammer shanks outward. Our director, Philip Burwell, had decided to make the instrument the centerpiece of the preview. He cleared the gallery, set out champagne, arranged 12 dozen candles in the sconces along the east wall. The Bosendorfer sat on the dais where the rostrum usually stood, lit from above by a single spot. He had also arranged, at considerable effort, for the evening's guest of honor to be Maestro Caspar Vane, the concert violinist. Vane was at the height of his reputation then, recordings, television, a standing engagement with a European orchestra, whose name I cannot spell. He was perhaps 55, lean, with the particular quality of stillness that famous performers carry in public, alert to the room's attention, at ease inside it. He arrived in a black overcoat and made no attempt to remove it. He moved through the guests with a glass of Chablis, and the unhurried manner of a man who has attended a great many preview evenings and found most of them pleasant enough to tolerate. Edmund Gale had been there since 5 in the afternoon. I had noticed him earlier without registering him as a guest. He was 28, perhaps 29, and he wore the one concession to the occasion, a dark jacket over the gray workshop coat he had not quite thought to remove, and he moved through the gallery with the absorbed attention of a man who was there to work rather than drink. Glenside Restorations had sent him to attend, I was told afterward, because the firm liked to have a technician present at the first public showing of a returned instrument, in case of adjustments. Edmund had been the one who had done most of the work on the Bosendorfer. He had spent, someone told me later, 4 of the 8 months on the action alone. He was not, in any obvious sense, a notable figure in the room. Medium height, quiet in his movements, with the large and careful hands you see on craftsmen who work at a small scale. He had set his tuning kit on the floor beside the instrument's far leg and was packing it away. The preview was beginning, and his work was done, when he paused and rested his left hand flat on the closed fallboard of the Bosendorfer, not pressing down, just resting it there, the gesture of someone listening through wood. Maestro Vane saw it. I cannot say with certainty whether what followed was cruelty or simply the reflex of a man so accustomed to being the most gifted person in a room that mockery had become a form of ease. He moved across the dais with his Chablis and spoke at a carrying volume, not quite loud enough to hush the whole room, but loud enough that the 8 or 10 guests nearest the piano heard every word. "You seem very attached to it," he said. "Go on then, play us something. Nothing too ambitious, something the hands might manage." There was a ripple of smiles. People near the piano half turned. I was standing by the east wall with Philip Burwell, and I saw the moment clearly. Edmund looked up at Vane, then down at the piano, and then, and this was the thing I would turn over in the car on the way home, he did not flush or apologize or lift his tuning kit and step away. He straightened, quietly. He looked at Maestro Vane for one moment, with an expression I can only describe as considering, and then he said, "All right," and sat down. There was a murmur among the nearby guests, the sort of sound a room makes when it expects a small comedy. I looked at Philip, who looked at me, and I could see from his face that he shared my mild alarm. He had spent a great deal on the evening, and the Bosendorfer had been restored at considerable expense, and neither of us quite knew what was about to happen. Vane stepped back half a pace to give the boy room, and angled himself slightly toward the nearest guests, as if he had arranged a mild amusement for their benefit. Edmund set his jacket on the back of a nearby chair. He sat at the bench and reached for the height adjustment knob without looking at it, turning it 3 deliberate times. He lifted the fallboard. He placed his hands in his lap and sat still for a moment. 4, 5 seconds. His eyes on the keys, his back very straight. Then he began. I am not, as I have said, a musical person. I attended school concerts because parents must, and church at Christmas because it seemed right. And I have listened to the radio in the car for 40 years without ever being able to name a composer from the first 4 bars. What I can tell you is what I saw. I can tell you what a room does when something unexpected happens to it. The first thing the room did was go quiet. Not the hush that falls when a speaker stands and clears their throat. That is an organized silence, a courtesy. This was something else. This was the silence of 30 people, each independently forgetting, in the same 5-second window, whatever they had been about to say. Conversations simply stopped, mid-clause, the way a candle goes out. I watched it happen. A woman near the window was raising her glass, and she lowered it without drinking. A man behind me stopped speaking mid-sentence and did not finish the thought. Philip Burwell, beside me, took a breath and held it. What Edmund was playing, I learned the name afterward. In the car, when I described the shape of it to my wife and she looked it up, was Schumann's Fantasia in C major, Opus 17. It is a piece in 3 movements, and it runs, apparently, to about 30 minutes when a professional plays it through completely. Edmund did not play all of it that evening, but he played enough. The first movement begins loudly, passionately, the word is, though I would have said urgently, like a conversation that has been held back for a very long time. And then it opens into something else, something that climbs and quiets and climbs again, and there are moments in it that feel less like music than like a room being rearranged around you while you stand inside it. I am aware this is not a precise description. I am a man who spent his professional life in precise descriptions. Lot number, dimensions, condition, provenance, estimated value. I do not have the language for what I heard. I can tell you that it was large, and that it was sorrowful, and that it was not in any way the work of someone who had only ever fixed pianos for a living. I watched Maestro Vane. He had been angled toward the room when Edmund began, the slight proprietary stance of a man who has set a small joke in motion and is waiting for the room to appreciate it. Within 30 seconds, he had turned entirely to face the piano. Within a minute, he had stopped holding his champagne glass with any intention of drinking from it. By the time the first movement reached its long, subsiding close, I did not know then it was the first movement. I thought it might be the whole. His face had the expression I have seen, in 41 years of auctioneering, perhaps 4 times, the expression of a professional who has been shown something they were not expecting and have not yet decided how to carry it. The Fantasia moved into its second movement, and the temperature of the room changed again. The second movement is where, my wife tells me, having now listened to 3 recordings, the music becomes martial, almost, striding and percussive, and then somewhere inside it, there is a passage where the march becomes a question, and the question becomes something that is neither march nor answer, but the space between them. The woman by the window was pressing her fingers to her mouth by then. The man who had stopped his sentence behind me had not resumed it. 3 people I could see had bowed their heads very slightly, the way people do in church when something in the service lands closer than they expected. I have been asked, since that evening, whether Edmund played flawlessly. I cannot tell you. I am not equipped to tell you. What I can tell you is that the room did not behave like an audience that was being played to adequately. It behaved like an audience that was being played to truthfully. There is a difference, and I have seen it, and it is the only distinction that matters. He played into the third movement, tender and inward, almost private, the way a letter is private, written for one person in a room of 40. And when it ended, when the last note simply ceased rather than concluded, as if the music had decided it had said what it needed to say, there was a moment, I would estimate 3 seconds, though it felt considerably longer, in which the room was absolutely, collectively still. Then the woman by the window began to applaud, Then the room stood. I stood. Philip stood. The two junior staff who had been managing the champagne stood. I do not recall deciding to stand. I recall that my hands were doing something, and I was doing it too. 44 people on their feet, in a candlelit gallery, around a Bosendorfer Imperial Grand that 9 hours earlier had been a piece of inventory. Maestro Vane was the last to rise. He stood slowly, in the manner of a man operating against some internal resistance. His champagne glass was at his side and very still. He brought his hands together. Once, twice, measured applause, the kind a professional gives when he is controlling something, and then he stopped controlling it, and he applauded with everyone else. He did not look at Edmund. He looked at the piano. He looked at the piano for a long time, and his face. I have described faces for 40 years, and I will try to do this one justice. His face had in it something that was not quite humility, because men of his stature rarely arrive at pure humility in a moment, but was something adjacent to it. The look of a man who has just recalibrated a long-held assumption and is not entirely certain what to put in its place. Edmund stood and moved the bench back with the same unhurried care with which he had found it. He retrieved his jacket from the chair. He was very still, the way the piece itself had been still at the end, not deflated, not overwhelmed, just present, and quiet, and finished. I made my way to him through the dispersing crowd. I am not sure why. I said something inadequate about what we had all just heard. He accepted it with a nod, and then, because I had nothing better to ask, I asked him where he had learned to play like that. He considered the question for a moment, as if deciding how much of an answer it deserved. My master, he said, Werner Hale. He ran the restoration workshop before I came. He'd played all his life, and never for an audience. He taught me the Schumann the last year before he died. He said it was the only piece that had ever said the thing he'd been trying to say. Edmund picked up his tuning kit. I hadn't played it in front of anyone before tonight. I wasn't sure I'd get through it. He paused. I'm glad someone asked. He left before the champagne was finished. I drove home on the Alderton Road in the dark, and I did not turn on the radio. I thought about what it means to carry something of that size, quietly, in a workshop coat, for years at a time, waiting for the evening when someone careless enough to dare you would accidentally give you permission. I thought about Werner Hale, whom I had never heard of, playing alone in a restoration workshop for a lifetime, and teaching one young man what the music meant before he went. After 41 years of reading rooms, I thought I had a reliable measure of what a person was likely to be. I understand now that I had been measuring the wrong things.